On the morning of Monday, November 23, 2020, at about 01:30 Eastern Standard Time, the fishing vessel Emmy Rose sank roughly 20 miles off the Massachusetts coast, near Provincetown. With no reported distress calls or signs of trouble received from the crew. As of the making of this video, the NTSB and U.S. Coast Guard's investigation into the vessel's demise is still ongoing. This will be an in-depth look at the rescue efforts, the vessel's history, and much of the authorities' findings so far. And as always, all sources, references, and featured media are linked in description. At 1:29 a.m., Monday, November 23rd, a transmission was received from an emergency position indicating radio beacon, or EPIRB. Every EPIRB transmits a signal unique to its respective entity or vessel. Vessel-mounted EPIRBs are designed as a last resort distress call. Triggered only once submerged, they float to the surface and begin transmitting pertinent data like coordinates and vessel identifiers. This information is received via satellite and forwarded to rescue coordinating personnel. Based on U.S. Coast Guard reports, their Boston sector location would head up search and rescue efforts, dispatching an Air Station Cape Cod-based MH-60 Jayhawk helicopter. First on scene approximately an hour and a half after the EPIRB pinged initially, followed shortly thereafter by a Coast Guard 47-foot motor lifeboat out of Station Provincetown, along with cutters Vigorous and Key Largo. Atlantic waters in this area are around 50 degrees or less in November. All units on scene searching throughout the night. An empty life raft, debris patch, and the EPIRB were the only findings upon arrival. The conditions at the time of initial search were reported to be 30-knot winds with up to 8-foot high seas, challenging but not considered extreme for this area of the Atlantic. At first light Monday morning, a Coast Guard HC-144 would be dispatched, helping to widen the search area. Efforts would continue through Tuesday, November 24th. After 38 hours covering approximately 2,066 square miles, nothing more than the initial findings, the empty life raft, debris patch, and EPIRB would be found on the surface. Coast Guard Command would suspend the search by roughly 5:45 p.m., Tuesday, November 24th. All 4 souls aboard were lost. The vessel would remain undiscovered until May of 2021, when the NTSB and U.S. Coast Guard collaborated with MIND Technology, Stelvagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary, and NOAA. At this point, the team was only using side-scan sonar, just confirming its location. Viewed from above, the Emmy Rose would be seen for the first time in 6 months. A clear picture of the fishing vessel sitting upright on the seafloor, outrigger still extended, at a depth of about 800 feet. This would of course confirm the vessel had sunk, but more importantly, its location did coincide with where the automated distress signal originated. These images would provide little to no insight, though, as to why this tragedy took place. 4 months later, in September of 2021, investigators teamed up once again, this time with the assistance of a remotely operated vehicle from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and the National Science Foundation. Deployed from Cutter Sycamore, these images from the ROV are all that's been published by authorities thus far. So it's unclear whether any images gathered from the September excursion provided clarity into the vessel's unusual demise. In the meantime, throughout the remainder of 2020, and even as recently as September 2021, multiple interviews have been conducted by the NTSB and Coast Guard in an effort to determine cause and potential safety recommendations. Although it can provide little in the way of actual closure, some of the interviews were pretty eye-opening as I read through the transcripts. The way the Emmy Rose was handled, according to interviewees who, to their credit, despite such a difficult situation, were very forthcoming. This painted a picture that was at least enough to, so far, create all these recommendations you see here. The recommendations and interviews we will cover in this video. However, the Emmy Rose didn't start its life as a groundfish net dragger. The booming ship industry in the 1970s and 80s brought about the production of outrigger shrimp boats in staggering numbers to keep up with market demand. The Emmy Rose was, originally, one such vessel, purpose-built for shrimp trawling, completed in 1987 by Tommy Nguyen Shipyard out of New Iberia, Louisiana. From the records I found, going by the original name of Miss Elizabeth III. The vessel would change hands and go by several other names after that. In 94, changed to Miss Monica. In 95, changed to Virgin Steel. 98, changed to Captain Huey. then in 2001 renamed to Sasha Lee when it was purchased by the now infamous Carlos Raphael and moved to New England for the new purpose it would serve throughout the next 15 plus years. This wasn't unique to the Sasha Lee though. Shrimp trawling comes with some of the highest bycatch rates in commercial fishing, meaning the style and method of netting used hauls in multiple other unwanted species that aren't shrimp, chief among them sea turtles. And bycatch species in any form of commercial fishing aren't always just simply thrown back unaffected. With regulations clamping down on Gulf Coast shrimp trawling toward the late 90s and turn of the century, with shrimp farming starting to contribute significantly to the U.S. shrimp supply around the same time, there was understandably a glut of shrimp trawlers becoming available on the market, looking for new homes. Ground fishing in New England waters has been an industry staple for hundreds of years. Cod, haddock, yellowtail, pollock, to name a few. However, commercially fishing for groundfish requires a different method of net dragging compared to shrimp trawling on the Gulf Coast. The New Bedford and Gloucester commercial fleets, two major hubs for ground fishing, are partly comprised of large numbers of former shrimp boats purchased and brought up from the Gulf. Many of the boats tend to be more flat-bottomed than the purpose-built trawlers of the Northeast. In addition, shrimp and prawn trawling uses what are known as outriggers. These long, heavy booms are used exclusively for dragging dual nets along the bottom, but important to note, are not used in the style of net dragging that's most popular off the New England coast. Instead, for groundfish applications, the former shrimp boats are heavily modified, with ramps and net spools on the stern, and sometimes additional booms are added, pointing sternward. The net's dragged directly aft of the vessel in either dual or single configurations. These methods do not utilize these heavy port and starboard outrigging booms. As you'll see in the transcripts of several interviews, the outriggers tend to be more of a liability in these repurposed shrimp boats. The notorious Carlos Raphael, known locally as the Godfather, according to several media outlets, in 2017, the New Bedford fleet owner was convicted on multiple charges of conspiracy, false labeling of fish, bulk cash smuggling with the assistance of a local sheriff's deputy, tax evasion, and falsifying federal records. In addition to Raphael's nearly 4-year jail sentence, he was also ordered to pay $3 million in civil claims and give up all involvement in commercial fishing permanently. Raphael was reportedly caught when baited by agents posing as, quote, wealthy Russian businessmen seeking to launder large sums of money through his companies. He was also ordered to forfeit at least 13 vessels from his fleet that prosecutors say were directly involved in his long-running scam of lying about the value and species of the fish he landed. Vessels like My Way, the Athena, the Sasha Lee, amongst others. The Sasha Lee having been in New England for more than 15 years by that point. In the years surrounding this, though, the Sasha Lee would have its own share of incidents, although not completely uncommon amongst fishing vessels in this area. In September 2010, the fishing boat experienced a total loss of propulsion at sea when the propeller shaft sheared. No one was injured and the vessel was towed back to port safely. This resulted in an estimated $55,000 in damages. In January of 2016, the Sasha Lee would report flooding in the fish hold due to water ingress from the propeller shaft. The shaft had been inspected just 2 days prior after becoming entangled and fouled by stray line that wrapped around the shaft and prop. This line was removed, but unbeknownst to the crew, the incident had caused further unseen damage to the shaft, causing it to eventually lose its watertight seal while out to sea. The U.S. Coast Guard and Good Samaritan vessel Triunfo would respond in time to aid the Sasha Lee, the Coast Guard providing 2 auxiliary pumps to help contain the flooding, and once the shaft was secured enough to mitigate water ingress, the fishing vessel Triunfo then provided the tow back into port. No injuries were reported, and this resulted in an estimated $20,000 in damages. In November of 2018, the Sasha Lee was escorting fellow fleet vessel My Way to Newport News in Virginia. The Sasha Lee experienced a sudden loss of hydraulic fluid, which subsequently damaged its clutch plates. This prevented the vessel from going into forward or reverse, a loss of propulsion at sea. The My Way would end up towing the Sasha Lee to port safely, with no injuries reported. The Coast Guard later determining this loss of hydraulic pressure was due to a lack of maintenance. Purchased in New Bedford, when many Carlos boats finally went up for sale all at once, the Sasha Lee would change ownership in May of 2020. Owner Boat Aaron and Melissa Incorporated would rename the Sashali to Emmy Rose. It cannot be overstated just how bizarre the circumstances of this vessel's total loss were, with no record of any distress calls, no victims, survival suits, or life preservers found, no communications out of the ordinary in the afternoon, evening, or as the events unfolded, to or from any of the crew. The interviews also revealed that vessels like the Emmy Rose were known to routinely stay in contact with loved ones on shore, managers, owners, shore-based support, but most crucially, fishing vessels maintaining contact with each other when out to sea, especially when fishing the same general area. It's a tight-knit community out there, and they never hesitate to contact each other when it comes to collision avoidance, vessel issues, or even just idle chatter. They aren't in some sort of fierce competition with one another where they avoid contact. In fact, it tends to be the total opposite. Now again, just to make one more point clear, information in this video is not meant to imply what was actually causal in the loss of Emmy Rose. This is just what I've researched and substantiated in the vessel's history, what investigators have gathered thus far, and also provides insight on, at least to me personally, a very intriguing investigation process, made even more interesting when there is so little to go on, with the root cause sitting there, metaphorically, just out of reach. When fishing vessel Aaron and Melissa II sank in 2018, 70 miles off the coast of Portland, Maine, another boat owned by Aaron and Melissa Incorporated, and perhaps worthy of a video on its own, the vessel had encountered heavy weather after struggling with water ingress throughout the night. According to authorities, wind gusts up to 50 knots and seas up to 20 feet high. From the time of unrecoverable list to completely underwater was about a 3-hour window. Despite some of the crew having worked to the point of exhaustion in the days leading up, fatigue that can happen all too often in the industry, they were all able to don life suits, call the Coast Guard, and inform their port engineer of the situation so that their onshore support could help maintain contact with the Coast Guard once the vessel was completely submerged. All 4 crew were rescued successfully when the Coast Guard's helicopter arrived roughly 2 hours after the distress call, recovering them from their life raft. Of all the quote Carlos boats lined up to choose from, the parties who purchased the soon-to-be Emmy Rose in May of 2020, upon seeing the Sashali, the future Emmy Rose engineer stating, "The engine was in pretty good shape, actually," which I was surprised because the boat was a Carlos boat that came from New Bedford, and the engine wasn't in bad shape. When asked by investigators what drew him to the Sashali in the lineup, the Emmy Rose manager stating, "The steel was in good shape on it, had a history of being a very good boat by the previous owners, and just it was an all-around good boat. There was a whole bunch of boats for sale, but not all good ones, you know? Just a very comfortable sea boat. She was just well laid out, plenty of power, plenty of on-deck power for winches and whatnot." The Emmy Rose owner stating, "The only thing about the Emmy Rose that I saw was it needed a good paint job, and that was it." When investigators asked, "So nothing structurally that caused any concern?" "No, not at all," was the owner's reply. However, it must be pointed out, in addition to the modifications from outrigger trawling to stern net trawling, when the vessel entered the Carlos fleet, like many other vessels of its type in New Bedford, the Sashali also received these massive steel bulwarks that raised the gunwale 4 to 6 feet. Somewhat common amongst these fishing boats in New England, the additional bulwark is meant to provide more protection from the elements for workers on the main deck. A former Emmy Rose deckhand telling authorities, "I think that the boats aren't that stable. Carlos had added a lot of extra steel up around the rails and stuff on them, which is what weighs them down a lot. They carry way too much fuel, which makes them heavy as it is. The storm wall from behind the wheelhouse back, like almost to where the door comes up, you know, like 6 feet tall, that was all add-on. Up around the bow, it was like a whole extra, 4 to 6 feet of rail added up around the whole bow of the boat. And then he had a bunch of extra rigging added up on top, like a real big mast and stuff. So yeah, the boats had a lot of extra weight on." The Sashali received a stability test around 2001 or 02, since these were the approximate years the conversion was made. The naval architect that performed the test stating, "Obviously the outriggers in the shrimping fleet are used for the nets, and I try to explain to the guys, outriggers do not add to the stability of a fishing boat. They detract from the stability of a fishing boat. What they do is because they're away aloft, they are ride controlled. They're like a shock absorber. So you've got the outrigger lowered and the bird in the water. The sole purpose is to slow the roll of the boat, to make the boat more comfortable and more workable. And these boats, when they're in the Gulf, they have a bulwark that runs from bow to stern. And what the guys up here do is they build that bulwark up. So if you look at the Sasha Lee and Emmy Rose, the walk space between the house and the side is enclosed to the deck house. But all of these are standard features you would see on a boat that was converted over. He'd go on to say, regarding the outriggers, typically they don't pass stability if they're up, so it's pretty standard that we put that in our stability booklets. You'll find that most of our stability booklets will say that they've got to lower those things. You've got something like 30, 40 feet in the air, so you take the center of gravity, that's 40 feet above the baseline of the boat that weighs about 1.5 tons. They do not enhance the stability of the boat. They are just there as shock absorbers. They just make the boat roll less when they're deployed. These Gulf coasters are very flat bottom, hard chine boats, so it has good initial stability. The outriggers make the boat workable, and it's gotten to the point where it's so ingrained in these guys, everybody's got them. When asked about weight creep by investigators, or weight slowly added over time due to more subtle modifications that can still affect stability, investigators showing pictures of the boat's evolution over time after becoming the Sasha Lee and then Emmy Rose, the naval architect stated, comparing the boat to when it happened, the net reels, the diameter has been increased pretty dramatically, and she's gotten a second boom. Those are the things that I can see just from the pictures. If you look at the pictures, it looks like they may have added as much as 4 feet to the diameter, which means they're carrying bigger gear. Again, just looking at the photographs, that jumps out at us. Expanding on the matter of stability, investigators also question the method of fuel usage from saddle tanks on either side of the vessel. In these types of fishing vessels, they're not using all the fuel that pulls into the engine. The unused excess fuel gets pumped back into whichever tank the captain has chosen in a process nicknamed burn and return. Now, I've been unable to determine what, if any, other fuel oil tanks the Emmy Rose had beyond those shown in the Sasha Lee stability reports from back in 2002, which shows only these 2 large saddle tanks. To burn and return from one side of the vessel to the other requires frequent stability management as the center of gravity shifts. This is exacerbated by the amount of fish in the holds, the ice used to keep the fish cool, saltwater ballast, dirty oil, weather conditions, the vessel's current activity or maneuvering requirements, and so on. A third-party condition and value survey was conducted in New Bedford in August of 2019, where the Sasha Lee was hauled out and evaluated. The survey published by investigators, unfortunately, contains only pictures, timestamps, and brief descriptions. It does not go into detail about what surveyors thought of conditions or the value they determined. The most recent safety inspection was July of 2020, with the Marine Safety Inspector checking out immersion suits, extinguishers, flares, the life raft, and other more subtle items like EPIRB batteries, safety sticker placement, routine stuff. The Emmy Rose ultimately passing inspection. By most interview accounts available, and from much of what I can find, the Emmy Rose's captain was a competent, respected, and very experienced ship's master, fisherman, and engineer. He knew all of his boat's systems very well, and would insist on performing any maintenance needed himself whenever they were at sea. The boat also had, for the most part, the same crew ever since its purchase in May of 2020. Deckhand number 2 and the captain had known each other and fished commercially together for years. The crew also regarded as highly competent and experienced fishermen and mariners. That fateful night, November 23rd, the captain reportedly had plans to unload the ketch in Gloucester and then make preparations to head right back out for a few more days. All 4 aboard reportedly got along very well and were not upset to be working a schedule that had them heading right back out to fish, potentially through the upcoming holiday. Interviewees stating those on board would not have felt obligated to remain if they needed to disembark for the holiday. The crew got along well, but just like any other commercial fishing operation, it wasn't always smooth sailing. A former fill-in deckhand, who was rather forthcoming about his most recent journey, roughly August or September 2020, aboard the Emmy Rose, did have the following to say, and keep in mind, this seasoned deckhand was only aboard to fill in temporarily. By his own admission, is also captain of Emmy Rose's sister ship, the Allagash. We was on our way back to port, and we started transferring fuel, which I didn't know about. I was down in the hole with the green guy showing him what to do. There was another guy at the wheel, and I noticed the boat started listing pretty bad, so I decided to come up out of the hole, but when I did, I stepped into waist-deep water, And, I wasn't very happy about it. Obviously, I went straight to the wheelhouse. There's a guy standing up there watching TV. And, I keep thinking about this as to how the boat could have sank. And had I not come up out of the hole that night when I did, another 10 minutes, she'd have rolled right over. And that was with somebody awake at the wheel. It definitely was not a fun scene. The investigators asked, "So you said as you came up, who was conducting the fuel transfer?" The deckhand replied, "The captain was at the time, but he went to his bunk as he was transferring fuel. I have no idea why. He went and laid down and fell asleep. And I come up out of the hole, waist deep water. I go over, try to get the scuppers open. All the gear is indiscernible out of the side. The side, all the indiscernible on deck. And I immediately go up to another deckhand, and I was like, what's going on here? He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, what do I mean? I said, we're half sunk is what I mean. Why haven't you got the captain up yet? Oh, well, it ain't my job, you go. And so I went and woke the captain up. And the second I woke him up, he knew what he had done, and he went down and started transferring it back across. And it was pretty flat calm the night this happened to me. Now, had there been a 10-foot sea rolling across the rail that night, it wouldn't have been good. He went on to say, I run the Allagash, the identical boat, and they hold so much fuel that I never even once transferred fuel. I've been running boats for 30 years, and I've never once turned on a transfer pump. Never. I don't believe in it because stupid stuff like that can happen. I always just open up, the burn and return on the two side tanks, burn them even. You shouldn't be burning on one side or the other, but I see other captains doing the same thing too. You shouldn't have to. I mean, if you got two side tanks, open up all 4 valves, it will burn and return evenly, and then you ain't got to get into transferring fuel. But I don't know what his common routine was. I only made them 2 trips with the Emmy Rose captain. At the same time, when asked about the vessel's overall condition, he did state the following. I thought it was in very good shape myself. I mean, it looked fine shine to me, but fresh paint does a lot. But my first look at the boat, assuming referring back to when he saw it at the time of purchase, yeah, the stern ramps looked like they was rusted right out of it. So, but then he painted it all up, so I don't know. But when I was fishing on it, yeah, the boat looking good, but like I said, paint does wonders. When the investigators questioned about weight of fish on board in pounds. And on that night that you're speaking of where the water on the aft deck, approximately how much fish did you guys have on board? The former deckhand would respond, oh, we probably had about 40,000 on. Okay, and how much do you think that boat can hold? Oh, well, I had 103,000 on the Allagash, so I'd say she can hold 100,000 easily enough. But like I said, I always burn, like when I first got on the boat, the fuel tanks was full. And it's like, why do we have all this extra weight on this boat? We already have all this heavy steel rigging on here and stuff. So myself, as the captain, I only fill my fuel tanks half full, just to try to compensate for all the extra steel that Carlos had added onto the boats. Now, if them fuel tanks was full to the top and then put 100,000 on it, probably would have been a little bit different. NOAA, or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, is a primary agency for managing U.S. fisheries and protection of marine mammals and endangered species. One of NOAA's methods to accomplish this is by sending an observer on board various fishing vessels to actively assess the catch and bycatch activities during routine voyages. A NOAA observer who came aboard the Emmy Rose for a ride-along around November 4th through the 12th, just a couple weeks prior to the incident in 2020, was also interviewed by the NTSB and Coast Guard on December 17th, 2020. The investigators asked, could you tell us about your experience on the Emmy Rose, the one trip that you made on it? The observer responded, yeah, so when I first got to the boat, they did ask me before I stepped on the boat if I was comfortable with weed, and kind of just was like, oh, I kind of just blew off the question. I kind of ignored it, and then I called my coordinator because I was like, we just talked about drugs on the boats before, so I called him to make sure, just to double check with that, and he was like, if you're comfortable going on that, like if it's just the crew, then it's okay. And they told me before, the captain would not be smoking it, and so I went on. The investigator followed up, okay, while the vessel was underway, did you actually see 3 crew members smoking weed? The observer replied, yes, I never saw the captain smoking, but I did see the crew. Okay, did you see any other drug usage or alcohol usage? No, just the weed and cigarettes. And was that a daily occurrence or at certain times of the day they were using? It was daily occurrence pretty much in between each haul. Did you ever not feel safe while you were on the boat? I always felt safe just because I never saw the captain using any of the drugs. I stayed away from those drugs all the time. I never saw the captain using it, so I felt safe in that aspect, and I always felt the boat felt stable. I mean, other than like the normal rocking from the waves, but I never felt unsafe. So once they were hauling and setting the nets, would it be around the clock operation, or would the crew seem to get some decent rest? Could you tell if anyone was working around the clock nonstop, or could you see them sleeping and taking naps? Oh, I could see them sleeping and taking naps, especially if it was a longer time that the fish nets were in the water. It could be from 5 to 6 hours. I believe one of them was almost 7 hours. So they would sleep when the nets were in the water after they were done with everything, but they would try to sleep as much as they could in between their breaks. Okay, would you say the captain was in the wheelhouse a majority of the time? Yes. And do you know what time? Was there a set schedule that the captain slept? No, it was pretty much just whenever. I feel like it was more at nighttime, but I don't think it was a set schedule. Alright, did you happen to see anything? Any maintenance or anybody complaining about something with the vessel being off? Just, the nets would get a little torn up, and I know the crew would complain about that because the captain would fall asleep at the wheel. Like he would doze off and would leave the nets in a little too long, like longer than they should have been. So then those nets would get torn up a little bit because they were in longer than they were supposed to be, and the crew would complain about that. I think they had to adjust and fix up the net maybe 2 or 3 times. Did somebody have to go up to the wheelhouse to wake up the captain then? Yeah. And did that happen often? Yeah. I know for like the last day when I had to get all my information about the boat, like about the expenses it costed for this trip, and just information about the nets, I went up to the wheelhouse maybe 2 minutes after he was just awake and doing something, and he had already dozed off. I didn't realize he was dozed off, and I asked him if I could ask him the questions then, just so I didn't wait until the morning when he was worried about landing the boat. And he was like, "Oh, did you have to wake me up when I was sleeping to ask me these questions right now?" So he wasn't happy about that. But yeah, the crew would have to wake him up sometimes and be like, "Hey, we need to get the net out of the water." The investigator followed up. Okay, the scenario when you're fishing and heading to the dock. So you're done fishing, they've got all their catch on board, and they're steaming in to offload. Could you kind of describe who's where and who's doing what at that point? So Captain was steering the boat, he was in the wheelhouse, and the crew would be cleaning up the kitchen, and just cleaning up the deck and making sure everything's back in its place. I think when they were done with that, they went to sleep. Okay, are you pretty sure though that as the vessel was heading back to Gloucester, that the master was generally the one always on the helm steering the boat? Yes. The NOAA Observer also confirming that they were able to use the boat's satellite phone easily to call loved ones and check in, or if needed, email was also available. Confirming that indeed cell service was non-existent, which is to be expected, but that the satellite phone worked fine, only dropping a call once, but working immediately after when trying the call again. The Emmy Rose also had triple redundancy in electrical power to the comms equipment. The main engine, a 630 horsepower 12-cylinder Caterpillar. The main generator, another smaller engine, enough to power the entire boat. The backup generator, another smaller engine, enough to power necessities like radio equipment. And backup batteries known to routinely have enough charge to allow for more than enough time to call for help should all the others fail. Investigators are also suspicious of some possible welding that the crew was performing while the vessel was underway. The NOAA Observer confirming that they knew of some welding even during their voyage, but only because they overheard the crew discussing it and didn't actually see it taking place. One other vulnerability the investigators are looking into is the lazarette. The lazarette on a vessel like this is the portion of the hull that provides access to the rudder mechanisms and/or prop shaft with a large hatch on top toward the stern. Should this be left open or otherwise fill with water, it could lead to a possibly unrecoverable situation. But interviewees don't have much information on it from the transcripts I've read so far. It's not a portion of a boat that gets accessed very often, like the fish hold or engine room, and thus didn't seem to stick out in interviewees' minds, in my assessment. Investigators also seem to be suspicious of this in combination with the reported 8-foot seas that night, potentially being following seas, as the Emmy Rose steamed toward Gloucester. Ideally, for seagoing vessels, riding out the storm means keeping the bow pointed into oncoming waves or a head sea when conditions are challenging. A following sea, the total opposite, can be deceivingly dangerous, however. When a vessel steams in the same direction as the waves, depending on the vessel's size and type, these can either be a benefit, say when the seas are mild and the easy waves provide some extra momentum, or riding the waves, so to speak, versus when the seas are large enough or have enough momentum that a wave overtakes the vessel instead. If the Emmy Rose was already stern heavy, for example, and worst case scenario, if the lazarette wasn't watertight at that moment, a 6 to 8 foot following swell could have been enough to overwhelm the aft of the vessel. Would this have been quick enough that not even a radio call could be made? It's difficult to say. The naval architect in his interview insisting that the vessel would needed to have capsized completely and near instantly to create such a situation. When these vessels have fish in their holds, it's also crucial they take stability into account when dividing their catch amongst the pens. These pens are not only meant to divide species, but allow the crew to control how the weight is distributed. In addition, the ice used to chill the live catch, especially in a vessel with no additional refrigeration like the Emmy Rose, will melt and create liquid in these holds. Bilge pumps are always prepared to pump this out or de-water the holds, but another phenomenon all boats of any size must always take into account is the free surface effect. The free surface effect is the tendency of liquids, and similarly of large quantities of small objects, like fish, shrimp, grain, or even just heavy loose gear or cargo, whose behavior approximates that of liquids, moving in response to changes in the attitude of a craft's cargo holds, decks, or liquid tanks in reaction to induced motions like waves, winds, or vessel maneuvers. Or to oversimplify, when a liquid tends to slosh around. Only in vessels where the quantity of material is enough and moves to one side suddenly, the forces can be so great it overcomes the vessel's ability to right itself, in extreme cases causing sudden capsizing, like we've seen in so many roll-on, roll-off vessels. The naval architect stating, "So you've got the heavier gear on board, you've reduced the stability slightly, and then you lose the rudder seal or you lose the shaft seal, and the boat starts to slowly take on water, and now you throw a free surface into it? Boats don't just disappear without something happening. There was a catastrophic event that caused this boat to capsize and..." The investigator interjecting, "Is that your opinion? You think it capsized?" "Oh yeah, I absolutely think this boat capsized. Boats don't disappear without a mayday if they didn't flip over. If you got the boat heeled almost to the rail, it's going to have no range of stability in that direction. It's going to want to roll that way. And then, if you throw free surface into the mix, and you've got that fluid moving over, then you can certainly get the boat into trouble." So that would be, with a combination of the two, enough to obviously trim the boat, turtle or capsize the boat, in your opinion? Yeah, I mean, if you got all that fuel on one side, and then depending on the amount of free surface you have in the fish hold, and then you induce some type of outside factor, a wave or a gust of wind, the boat could certainly go. Investigators are also looking into the vessels that were in the vicinity that night. So far, there is only one listed on the official report, another fishing vessel, and no further details. The manager of the Emmy Rose was the type to stay in relatively close contact with the vessel, but didn't receive any communications from them the night of the sinking. However, the father of one of the deckhands did have the following to say regarding the night of the incident. The investigators asked, "When he would get underway on these trips, would he ever reach out to you, communicate with you while he was underway?" "Yeah, he'd call once in a while and so forth, let us know when he was coming back, going out." "Did he call you on this last trip?" "Yes, he did." "When did he call you?" "It was probably between midnight and 12:30. Yeah, the date of the sinking. Our conversation was about buying a part. He wanted to know if I had ordered a part for his 4x4. And then all of a sudden he just said, 'I gotta go, something happened,' and that was it. Never heard from him again until you guys contacted us." "And he didn't say anything else after the..." "No. Just, 'I gotta go'?" "That was it. All we mainly talked about was the clutch assembly for his 4x4. He did say they was coming into Cape Cod. I thought they would be going into Gloucester, but I don't know if he's got to go by that way or what." "Is that typical for them, to go to Cape Cod?" "Not really. They'd go there every once in a great moon, or by their way, or they unloaded their fish in Gloucester. Being 20 miles out, I'm sure they was coming in from someplace." The vessel's manager did have this to say regarding the captain from their conversations in the days prior to the incident. He was going to go back out and fish over the holiday, and as luck would have it, the 20th of this last month was his birthday. He was at sea for his birthday, on his last birthday. That sucks, don't it? I remember calling him and wishing him a happy birthday. We'll get into my final thoughts shortly. As for the safety recommendations and potential lessons learned from the U.S. Coast Guard's report, Recommendation number 1, Fishing Vessel Periodic Stability Verification. Implement new recommendations requiring commercial fishing vessels 79 feet or greater in length undergo vessel stability periodic verification by a qualified individual every 5 years and/or after a major modification to ensure the vessel is still in compliance with their required stability instructions. Implementing this regulation will ensure that a vessel's profile has not been substantially altered in a manner which adversely affects its stability, including the cumulative effects of all alterations. Recommendation number 2, Fishing Vessel Required Training for Operators. Reflect requirements enacted under the Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2010, specifically provisions for individuals in charge of vessels operating beyond 3 nautical miles from the baseline to pass a training program covering certain competencies, including stability. Most fishing vessel operators are unlicensed, and a licensed operator is only required on vessels over 200 gross tons. This new training requirement for operators will help ensure their competency to command the vessel. Recommendation number 3, Load line for applicable commercial fishing vessels. Reflect the requirements enacted under the Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2010, requiring applicable commercial fishing vessels to have a load line assigned. Require a fishing vessel built on or before July 1st, 2012 that undergoes a substantial change to the dimension of or type of vessel completed after July 1st, 2012, or a later date set by the Coast Guard, to comply with an alternate load line compliance program developed in cooperation with the industry. A load line indicates the minimum safe freeboard to which a vessel may be loaded. Fishing vessels are often modified such that their dimensions are changed, or they are converted to a different type of fishing vessel. When this action is taken, the loading conditions and seaworthiness of the vessel can be affected. Recommendation number 4, Chemical Testing for Commercial Fishing Vessel Crew Members. Implement new regulations requiring certain crew members aboard commercial fishing vessels to be subject to a chemical testing program. It's recommended that the Commandant should require pre-employment, random, and reasonable cause drug testing for those crew members who are in safety-sensitive positions on board documented commercial fishing industry vessels operating beyond 3 nautical miles of the baseline. Individuals in charge and crew aboard commercial fishing vessels less than 200 gross tons are not required to hold merchant mariner credentials. Therefore, the only instance when they're required to be drug tested is after a serious marine incident. Instituting a pre-employment, random, and reasonable cause drug testing program covering all crew members who are in safety-sensitive positions would reduce the risk to crews and vessels. Recommendation number 5. It's recommended that the Fishing Vessel Safety Division provide guidance and instruction to vessel examiners to conduct fishing vessel stability training and outreach, specifically to include proper freeing port design and the importance of maintaining watertight integrity. Recommendation number 6. Commercial fishing vessel examiners to conduct crew endurance management system and anti-fatigue training and outreach. It's recommended that the Fishing Vessel Safety Division provide guidance and instruction to vessel examiners to conduct education and outreach to promote awareness and provide crew endurance management system and anti-fatigue training. Fatigue experienced by commercial fishing vessel crew members while fishing is a chronic issue and often a contributing factor to marine casualties within the commercial fishing vessel community. This investigation revealed a latent unsafe condition where the crews of the Emmy Rose, who had been working in the commercial fishing industry for their entire adult life, had grown accustomed to working and operating vessels while fatigued. It can offer much insight into where investigators are in their process whenever preliminary recommendations are provided. It's not unheard of for either the NTSB or Coast Guard to post them partway through an investigation like this. And it's also no secret that commercial fishing crews sometimes push just about everything to its limit. Their vessel, the conditions, regulations, especially themselves. Creating these, even just potential lessons learned, can do no harm in promoting awareness and helping future mariners return home safely to their families, every time. Thanks so much to all those viewers and supporters out there who enjoy this content and for being patient with me. and especially to the Immortar supporters on Patreon. A shout out to those top tier supporters: Alex S, Alex W, Andrew M, Jeremy H, Kenneth P, Lil Tony, Nathan F, Paul R, and Philip B. Don't forget, you're important and your safety matters.